in that area.
I don't know why I'm gonna see if we need to record this because I think we don't. Why does it say recording in progress? Okay, there we go. I'm just waiting for my colleague Christine Shivo to get on.
Moment. Hey, Janice.
Hey, Blaine.
We're just waiting for Christine, right?
Yeah. Is this supposed to be recorded? Because I paused the recording.
Oh no, it can be recorded. Yes, absolutely. And just not everybody's able to attend.
Oh, okay. All right. Well, maybe we'll start recording when Christine gets here.
No problem. Right.
Sorry. Stop.
Oh.
I also have a dog with me who was barking like a minute ago.
Really? Uh-oh. All the dogs are just like, they don't want this meeting to happen. Hi, Christine.
Hi, everybody.
All right. I appreciate you coming. I know that Dr. Barstow was not able to make it.
On vacation.
Yeah, that happens.
Which is very unusual for him.
Yeah, he's usually very, very like on it, like super busy, it was hard to even get this on his calendar. And then he was like,
Yeah.
well, I gotta go on vacation. All right, so did you press the record button, Janice?
I think so, because I got a message that said recording in progress.
Yes.
Yeah, it's recording now.
All right, great. All right, well, thank you everyone who has have come in already. I think we're gonna just wait a few more minutes, maybe a couple more minutes before we go ahead and start. And so I sent out a reminder in the Slack channel.
Can you hear the church bells out my window? I'm just wondering.
I can.
Do you hear them?
I do.
Yeah. I'm in Allentown, Pennsylvania. I'll be moving very soon, a couple weeks, and this is what I'll miss the most, the church bells, because they play these pretty hymns twice a day.
Oh.
Mm-hmm.
I had about maybe 20 folks register for the this presentation, but oftentimes I'll get like a little bit less because, you know, for whatever reason they can't make it. But good thing we are recording, because I'm going to go ahead and post this on the website. We have a new admin website for all of our events. All of our virtual events, we'll go ahead and post the recording so folks can watch it at their leisure. All right, so it is 9:05 and let's go ahead and get started. So hi everyone, my name is Blaine Jones, admissions director for Berkeley Journalism, and I'm glad that you all here. Today's presentation or virtual admit event new admin event is going to be about the investigative reporting program. Dr. Barstow, David Barstow, who oversees the program, he unfortunately wasn't here or not able to make, he's on vacation, but we have two of our other leadership staff members for the program, Christine and Janice. Thank you so much for being here and offering your time and volunteering your time. And yeah, right now the show is completely yours. If you can go ahead and introduce yourselves, and I'll pass the mic on to you.
Great, thank you everyone. Thanks for joining us. My name is Janice Huey. I'm the Managing Director of the Investigative Reporting Program at Berkeley Journalism. Some of you might not have visited the campus, but we have an office that's separate from the journalism school, but it's just across the street. And we share a building with the Daily Californian, which is the student newspaper at UC Berkeley. So the whole building is called like the Center for Independent Journalism. But we have our own office space, and we operate very much like a professional newsroom. We have professional editors and reporters and producers on staff, and we hire students to work on our projects as reporters and research assistants. And if we're doing a film, sometimes production assistants and associate producers and that sort of thing. So right now, David Barstow is the head of the program. He took over about a year and a half ago, or almost 2 years ago, from Lowell Berkman, who you may have heard. He's a legendary investigative journalist. And this goes way back. You guys are kind of young, but he was a 60 Minutes producer at CBS News for a long time. And he was portrayed in a Academy nominated film called The Insider, about his role as a 60 Minutes producer in sort of uncovering the whole tobacco scandal. And Al Pacino played him in the movie. That's his big claim to fame. So in The Office, I think we still have some photos of him with Al Pacino. But he retired a few years ago, and then David Barstow, who is a 4-time Pulitzer Prize winner from the New York Times, took over the program. And David is changed the focus somewhat. It's always been focused on putting out professional documentaries and investigative stories in print, magazine, online, podcast, and all different platforms. But he's kind of shifted the focus a little bit to be more student-centered. So we're really focused on getting student work published. And while in the past students may have been part of big projects, students are now at the center of our projects. And it's oftentimes the students' stories which are the focus of our work. At the same time, we do have Christine, who will introduce herself in a second, and Garrett Theroff on staff. Garrett came to us from the LA Times, and his focus is on child welfare and juvenile justice stories. And any of you who have Netflix may have seen a film, a 6-part docuseries that focused on his reporting, and he was in the film, called The Trials of Gabriel Fernandez. And that docuseries is about a very horrific child abuse case and the role of child welfare workers in his case and ultimately his death. So he, at any given time, is working on several child welfare stories. And right now, I think he has a team of like 5 students working with him, but that's pretty standard for him. Just a little bit about myself. I've been at the IRP for about 10 years in various roles, but this role mainly as managing director. And I just do a range of administrative and editorial duties for the program just to keep things running. And I'll let Christine introduce herself.
Hi, everyone. Thanks, Janice. Janice is the glue. She runs everything. So I just want to say that you want to get to know Janice because she knows how everything goes together and she has the answer to all the questions. I am very new to the program. I was hired in January after a very long career in local news, which I thoroughly enjoyed. Local newspapers specifically. And I was hired to be the local news editor for our two student-run news sites. One is called Oakland North and the other is called Richmond Confidential. And as the title suggests, the one covers Oakland and the other the city of Richmond. And if you're like me and not from California, you probably, of course, would have heard of Oakland, but not Richmond, which is a really sizable community. I mentioned, for those of you who were on first before we officially started, that I live in Allentown, Pennsylvania, which is the fourth largest city in Pennsylvania, and it is about the same size as Richmond, California. But unlike Richmond, California, we have a local newspaper here, and Richmond does not. So our students are in Richmond covering all of the regular, the daily news activities, the city council, the school district, and they're in neighborhoods and communities and, covering business and personality profiles and all sorts of things. And one thing that we haven't done so much over there is investigative reporting. So with my hiring, the IRP is making a commitment to investigative local reporting. And we connect this with a class that some of you, I assume, will be taking in the fall called J200. There are different sections of it, but two of those sections are devoted to the local news sites. But before the classes started up, there were two students who were working with me to just kind of keep the sites alive. And one of those students, Noah Boston, produced a really great investigative piece that we posted a few weeks ago about how about 64 police officers in Oakland made more than $100,000 last year just on overtime. So that did not include their salaries. And one officer made more than $300,000 last year just in overtime. And there were dozens whose overtime payments enabled them to make more money than the mayor did last year. So Noah published that. It was a really comprehensive piece, and it was just picked up this week by KQED, which is a public radio station. So we're really excited about that. And, as our first major investigative reporting piece to come out of the two locals with the launch of our new, emphasis, I guess. And I'm sure that I'll be working with a lot of you, right, Janice? You would anticipate that, wouldn't you? And looking forward to it. I also oversee a project that we're doing with a grant from a foundation that promotes aging at home or aging in place. And Janice is our grant writer, and she is really great at connecting us with foundations, with nonprofits that are looking for good, just good journalism. And then we work with students on these stories, and then we help them get these stories published. And by help, I mean, we really go to bat. We really shop the stories to, the sites that we think would be most suitable. And recently, within the past 2 or 3 weeks, I guess, we had one of those pieces published in all the Bs, the Sacramento Bee, the Modesto Bee, the Fresno Bee, and 2 other McClatchy news sites. On all of those sites, this story was on the homepage, and then it was later published in print. And we are on the verge of having another one of those pieces from that grant published in USA Today. They accepted it, and now it's just in the editing process. And a few months ago, the LA Times picked up one. So we really work hard to get your work published and to work with you to get the stories in shape so that they're, when they do leave our hands, they're, they're structured well. There are no holes in the story. It's a fluid piece. and it conforms to AP style. So that's, all of those things that you'll be working on throughout your 2 years here, because every story that you produce in print at least has to adhere to those things. Did I miss anything, Janice?
No, I think Julie has a question.
Yeah.
Oh, I'm sorry, go ahead.
I'm wondering, when we apply to IRP, do we apply with the story, or is it more that we just apply to be research assistant?
Well, there's a couple different ways to, to have access to the IRP.
Mhm.
First, you could be in one of David Barstow's classes. He teaches investigative reporting for first years and then also for second years. And I believe the second year class, you apply with a story pitch, and there's not everyone can get into the class because there's limited spots. And that way you work directly with him on stories, and has office hours. He's super generous with his time. His goal really is to get students published. And another way is, Christine will be working with the two of the J200 classes, Richmond Confidential and Oakland North. So that's another way, that your stories can get published. And then every semester and summer, we offer research assistant positions. And students generally work about 10 hours a week. That's the commitment that we ask for. When the story is ramping up, they might work more, but that in that way you get attached to a project. When you apply, you can say that you're interested in, say, like the environment or aging or police misconduct stories, or you tell us what you're interested in, and very likely we'll have a project. At any given time, we have like a dozen projects going on. Some of them are collaborations with other news organizations and whatnot. And so you get assigned to work with a professional editor reporter on a project. And those are semester to semester. So there's an application process for that.
Thank you.
And we've been hiring 20 plus research assistants per semester. So we do, that's a big change from a few years ago when there were just a handful of students at any given time. Our goal really is to absorb as many students as possible. Does anyone else have any other questions? I think this session works best if we just kind of keep it free flowing and casual.
Someone asked when the application process starts.
For the fall, we'll be sending out an email to all first and second year students in August, and you'll generally get 2 weeks to send in your resume and a cover letter. And we're not looking for anything fancy. It's really just a cover letter to explain why you want to be involved in the investigative reporting program, what topics interest you, what you hope to learn. If you've had any experience, great, you can attach a few clips, but oftentimes we hire people with no experience. We just want someone, we're really, as David Barstow will say, we're looking for people who are intensely curious. That's like the most, the trait that we're seeking. It doesn't have to be that you've written a bunch of stories or you know how to file FOIA requests or anything like that. Those are things that we'll teach you. That's our job, is to teach you. But we just want someone who's really passionate about stories and digging deep, and who isn't afraid to kind of get their hands dirty, because not all investigative reporting is like glamorous. There's a lot of, Christine will tell you, there's a lot of documents, a lot of waiting, a lot of door knocking and dead ends. But when it does really come together, it's really quite exhilarating. One quick example, I don't know if you have seen on the J School homepage, that we had several students working on a story on extremist groups, and they've been doing this since last summer. And the project has kind of ebbed and flowed. It's been steady all along, but we weren't really sure where it was going. They were uncovering really fascinating material on the Boogaloo Boys, this extremist group. And then all of a sudden, it just all came together, and Front documentary program on PBS was interested in the stories that they uncovered, and they were part of the Frontline documentary American Insurrection that launched in April. And if any of you have seen that, I urge, or haven't seen it, I urge you to watch it. The students are actually in the documentary being interviewed about their reporting. So, I mean, that's like one great example of just like steady, persistent reporting by students that really bore fruit in the end. Anybody else have any questions? Or Christine, you want to say something?
I was going to just ask if anybody has any experience with investigative reporting. Julia, so maybe, and Chrissy. And where did you have that?
Briar Patch Magazine. I wrote a deep dive into leftist Jewish activism in Canada.
Oh, okay, that sounds interesting.
That was a few years back, but recently I want to get back into it. But yeah.
That sounds good. And Chrissy?
Yeah, I don't know exactly to what extent it counts. It was in undergrad, and I did a story on the vegan food that was offered on campus.
Mhm.
Students kind of reported getting sick. People had been vegans for years. Usually, if you try to reintroduce foods too fast, you can get sick. So people were suspicious, and mostly the college had been given like this A+ rating by some vegan food rater, and they were using it as an advertising tool, but students were saying something very different about the vegan food. So that's kind of what it was about.
It sounds like a really good story.
That sounded really super interesting. Chrissy, she kind of like undersold it a little bit, but the
I
way
know.
it was super, I was like drawn in.
It was an interesting situation. I felt really, it was interesting because I had to, like, I didn't have a meal pass to go into the dining room to see it myself. So every day we had to send a different reporter in to like take pictures of all the food and then get ingredient lists. It was the funniest, weirdest experience of my life.
What college paper?
So Ithaca College, so the Ithacan.
Yeah, I'm really familiar with the Ithacan.
Yeah.
At the Allentown Morning Call, maybe you heard of it, because we have interns from the Ithacan.
Yeah.
Because it's such a good student newspaper, and we've had just one successful intern after the next.
I loved writing for the Ithacan. I loved my time on the editorial board there. So I'm glad to hear someone else has had good experiences, because
definitely. Mm-hmm. Anybody else want to tell us about your journalism experience, or not that you're expected to have any, but since we're talking journalism, how many of you are interested in print? Documentary, radio, or audio? There you go. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Well, all of that is here, and I really enjoy. At the end of the year, we do student showcases. This was my first time seeing them, and I was just blown away. It was just the documentaries, the podcasts, the narrative stories. Yeah, all of them really well done, and just there's an incredible amount of commitment from students. Like, students are really serious about their work here. Wouldn't you agree, Janice?
Yeah, there's a lot of attention paid to the product that they put out. And we've seen students who come in thinking that they're interested in print, and then they take an audio class and they're like sold on audio. So a lot of minds are changed when you're kind of introduced to a different medium. You start to fall in love with it. But we do, our focus is investigative reporting. And that can be in all forms. As I mentioned, Garrett Theroff, he's written for the LA Times, the New York Times, the Atlantic, and then he turned around and did a Netflix documentary. So it's really about the story and the reporting rather than the medium. We have a long history with Frontline. So if you are interested in documentary, we have done many documentaries for Frontline. And in fact, 2 Frontline staff people will probably be setting up shop in our office and using some cubicles in our office permanently. So that's a great resource to have 2 Frontline people in our office. And they might be hiring students to help with their projects. And we just have a lot of contacts throughout the industry. We're always trying to place student stories. So we're a good resource in terms of contacts in the outside world. And Betsy Raitt does a great job as the career development director, but we also can be helpful in getting your stories or getting you hooked up with different people in the industry. I should mention that one thing that we do every year, but we haven't for the past 2 years due to COVID, is that the investigative reporting program hosts the annual Riva and David Logan Symposium on investigative reporting. It's now, I'm starting to lose track because of COVID, but I think we've done 13 or 14 symposiums. It's held every April over one weekend in April. People from all over the world fly in. It's an invitation only event. So it's not open to just any journalist. They have to be invited because of space limitations. So about 300 people show up to this weekend, and we put on panels and speeches, and it's very much a networking event. A lot of collaborations between news organizations have occurred during this event. And students are, of course, it's changed over the years. We're letting, not all students have been allowed to come just because of space, but we do encourage students to apply to get a spot to come in, and we'll figure that out. This year will be different because of COVID. We're not sure how large the event will be, but it's a very exciting time. We have a mentorship session where students can sign up for, so they can be connected with an investigative journalist. But it's kind of a showcase event for the journalism school. So it's definitely something to keep your eye on for the spring.
Yeah, I should mention too that in Richmond Confidential in Oakland North, we also accept video stories and audio stories and interactive graphics and photo essays, things like that. So you don't have to just adhere to the traditional print storytelling format. The platform allows for some variation. Anybody else have can you talk more about the relation between the IRP and J200 Richmond Oakland sections? Yes, Grace. As I said, I'm brand new to this, so I haven't experienced it. I'll be experiencing it for the first time the same way that you will. But there are, I think, Janice, are there 4 sections of J200? And one of those sections is Richmond Confidential, and one of those sections is Oakland North. And they're taught by 2 different instructors, neither of whom is me. So the instructors work with the students on their stories, which then will come to me as the editor of the site. And the stories, when they're ready, if I don't think they're ready, I'll ask the reporter to do a little more work. If they need some restructuring, we'll sit and we'll restructure the story. And then they get posted on the site. And then we would look to see if there is an opportunity to do more with that story. Is there something that needs further investigation, or should there reporter perhaps team up with another reporter to delve a little more deeply into something. And it will depend on how the instructors decide to structure their own classes. But in the past, the students have been assigned beats. And some of you already have been reporters, so you know what a beat is. But for those of you who don't know, a beat is basically a coverage area or a theme. So a beat might be Richmond City Hall. And so that would mean that you're going to be monitoring the city council and all of the, development commissions and things like that. But a beat also might be healthcare, which is a theme. And that just means that, you're looking for more topic oriented stories. That's how it's been done in the past. I mean, the instructors they don't have their hands tied. They can be creative in how they want to do it. So I can't tell you for sure how it's going to be set up. But all of the students will be, the class is story driven. So all of the students will be expected to produce stories on a regular basis, not without being first instructed in how to do that. So no one expects you to come in and know what you're doing right off the bat. Although some of you will, because some of you are coming in with experience. But I'm sure that by the end of that class, you'll see a real evolution in your reporting skills and in your writing skills. If we've done our job well, you will. Does that answer your question, Grace?
Yeah, thank you.
Okay.
Oh, Christine, maybe you can touch a little bit deeper on Richmond and what's special about Richmond.
Richmond, I guess the most special thing about Richmond is that, it's north of Berkeley, and it has a very long shoreline, which apparently is very scenic in spots. But at the tip of it, there's a Chevron refinery. Are any of you from Richmond or familiar with it? Some of you are familiar. Andrew's familiar. And the Chevron refinery has been there as long as the town has been there. Basically, the city grew up around it. So in the early 1900s, Standard Oil set up this refinery there. And since then, that refinery has been the city's largest employer. And as you can imagine, also a big polluter. So there have been many issues over the years, near catastrophes, explosions, leaks. A recent leak, we covered a leak. Noah Boston and Injun Kim covered a leak this year, as another investigative piece, pulled a lot of public records and found that there was a 40-minute gap in the time that Chevron discovered the spill and when it reported the spill. In the meantime, a passerby saw a sheen on the bay and reported it. So authorities were alerted, but not by Chevron. And so there's this, deep connection between the city and its largest employer, as would be the case in any city. But in this case, it's not, you have to question the benefits of this business. And it also runs a newspaper. It runs the daily Richmond Standard. And if you were to just look up, let me, see what's going on in Richmond, looking for a local news site, my understanding is until fairly recently, that site did not say that it was operated by the Chevron company. You would have just thought it was a regular news site, but they do run it like a regular news site, and that they hire reporters, and that's the reporter's job. The reporters work on that site, but they're Chevron employees. It's just that you won't find negative information about Chevron there, including that spill that I just mentioned. They never reported it. So that is one of our competitors. And then there's a really, really good news site there called Richmond Pulse, which is run by youth. That's how it's defined. I don't know how they define youth, but on their site, it says that it is, written by the youth of Richmond. And we partner with them on many stories. We co-publish. They can publish our stories. We can publish their stories. And of course, they did not ignore this bill because, they're doing serious journalism over there. So it's from what I understand, Richmond is just not it's not as affluent as, the other Bay communities around it, like San Francisco and Berkeley and Oakland. So I'm very interested in going into Richmond and seeing it. I've been watching their city council meetings and can't believe how long they go on. I've covered city councils for, I don't know, like 30 years or something, and never saw a city council that met regularly for about 6 or 7 hours every time. So that's a little daunting. Now everyone's going to say, I'm not working for Richmond Confidential. I'm not covering those city council meetings. Fortunately, they're on Zoom now.
Well, I think just to emphasize that Richmond is an undercovered community and there's so much potential there, especially for dogged students to uncover stories. One quick example is in 2014, a student who was writing for Richmond Confidential, I believe as part of J200, uncovered that Chevron was funneling millions of dollars into political action committees that were responsible for like all these ads and billboards all over Richmond. And that story got the attention of Bill Moyers and other national outlets, and the student reporter, Harriet Rowan, I'm not sure where she is now, but I'm sure she's doing something great, actually got national fame for that story when it was interviewed by Bill Moyers on his show. So it just goes to show you that local investigative reporting really matters. And if you're looking to get into that, Richmond is like a gold mine.
Yes.
Because nobody is really paying attention.
No, and the community apparently really welcomes us too, because they want people to pay attention. And it has a very active, civic-minded community. That's partly why the meetings go on so long, because it isn't unusual for there to be 25 public speakers at any given meeting, which is good. That's, that suggests an engaged community.
Well, I kind of want to hear what the students, what topics are of interest to you. In the past, we've had a lot of students interested in the environment and investigating anything around climate change. Police misconduct is also a big topic, and we're doing some projects around that. But what are some stories that you guys would like to pursue? Julia?
Well, I've been covering, I've been a health reporter for like a year during the pandemic and have covered aging related issues. So I guess that topic interests me.
Great, that's awesome to hear.
Yes.
I mean, I think some students might think like, oh, aging, that sounds a little bit, can be dull, but in fact, the students that have been who've been working on our aging project have, I think they felt like they really got so much out of it. Wouldn't you say, Christine? They're very human stories. Yeah, why don't you talk a little bit more about that?
And a number of the stories were really policy stories. So and how that policy affects people. But the thing about aging is we're all doing it, right? And when you're young, you're just not thinking about these issues. And even now, your parents are even still young. Maybe your grandparents aren't, but your parents are. But you will confront these issues in your life. You're going to confront them either yourself or because you're going to be taking care of your parents. So it's every issue that affects aging actually does affect you. You just, kind of maybe put that in the back of your mind and you don't think about it, but it really does. And the policy issues that have come out of that this year have been eye-opening to me. And it just so happened that while we were doing these stories, in Biden's rescue plan, it included billions of dollars for community-based program for older people and disabled people. So it was like all these programs that we've been writing about got this sudden injection of cash into them that made, kind of jazzed up our reporting as well. And also opens up a lot of new avenues for the next group who will be writing about that grant to pursue.
Christy
Yes,
mentioned science and the environment. So I just put in the chat a link to a story that was done by one of our research assistants, Julia Kane, who just graduated. She, we paid her to be a research assistant in collaboration with Inside Climate News, which some of you may have heard of it. They won a Pulitzer a few years back. So Julia actually co-reported this story with a JSCO alum on storage tanks and the fumes that they emit and the dangers to people who live nearby. I encourage you to read it. It's a very deeply reported story. They had to go through hundreds of documents and interview lots of scientists to understand the science behind the story. And I believe there's another story coming out shortly. So that's just one example of the IRP collaborating with another news outlet, assigning a student to a project and that student getting published.
And we have how many working on Inside Climate for the summer, Janice?
Summer, we have one. So it's generally one student that could expand at some point if there's more projects, and certainly if there's more interest among students to do environmental stories. That's been a really nice relationship that we've had with that news outlet.
And the one who's working in the summer is not the one who produced the story that you posted. This is a new student who was working on the aging series before. So she's been very busy. I would urge you, someone put, Grace put that she's interested in mental health stories. I would urge all of you to take J260, which is David Barstow's investigative reporting class for first year students. I audited that class this semester and I really loved it. First of all, you get into his head. He dissects some of the bigger stories that he did. And so you get this behind the scenes look, which is fascinating. But also the way he structured it this semester, I don't know if he'll always structure it like this, was to for students to work on a story pitch, which meant they had to do a lot of research. They had to do some interviewing to come up with an investigative story that no one else has done before. So that's when you think about that, it's a really hard assignment that you, from your brain, has to come up with this novel idea and then how to execute it. So there were, something like 25 students in the class, and the pitches were maybe like 5 or 6 pages long, included their research and everything. But the ideas, there's just such a wide range of ideas. So if Grace is interested in mental health, for example, she could develop a story on that topic. David doesn't limit the topics. It's up to you. And there are office hours with him and with me and his teaching assistants to help the students through that process. And there are students that took office hours, signed up for office hours pretty much every week just to, get some guidance. But at the end of it, he picks, I don't know if there's a set number, but let's say about 10. I don't think he picks more than a dozen right, Janice? About 10. We're not in the process. We're not finished with the process of choosing yet, but he'll pick certain number of those pitches, and those students in their second year get to execute those, which is really interesting. So it's not, I mean, the exercise is good. It's a good one because there's a lot of training that goes into that and a lot that you're going to learn from it. But then, there's this possibility that your idea could actually become a story, which is kind of exciting.
Anyone else with some topics of interest to share? You can raise your hand too. You don't have to do it just in the chat. We love to hear different ideas because we're just always amazed at the story ideas that come from students. Like we have our own and we get tips and things like that, but the diversity of stories that come from the students is actually what kind of energizes us. Immigration. Okay. Yeah. I'm trying to think of a recent immigration story. We did a story, Abby Van Sickle, who was a IRP reporter a few years back, but now works with the Marshall Project. She actually works out of a cubicle in our office, and she did a big story on undocumented children during that whole border crisis a few years back during the Obama administration. She did a big story that was published in the Washington Post on the fact that a lot of the undocumented children were actually being released into the hands of traffickers into the United States and working at factories. And that was part of the documentary that Andreas Sidiel and Daffodil Altan did with Frontline called Trafficked in America. I'm not sure if some of you saw that. So we've had a series of stories on the plight of undocumented and immigrant workers working on farms, working as janitors, and then in this case, children being trafficked into factory farms. So that's sort of been a theme a topic that we've covered for quite a while. But as far as immigration specific stories, we don't have anything currently brewing, but if you come up with some story ideas, we would love to hear them.
Janice, do you want to talk about the partnership with the New York Times during COVID?
Yeah, sure. Well, obviously, since David's had a long history with the New York Times, he has some excellent connections there. So when COVID hit back in March of last year, and classes were kind of upended and students, were concerned about the rest of their semester, how their projects was playing out, David organized this project, which we later called Chronicling COVID. Some of you may read some stories where we organized 80 plus students who were interested in participating. And we got about 20 or so faculty and staff members to be team leaders. We organized this group of people and carved up the state according to county. Everybody had their beats and their topics. And we had morning meetings. It was run very much like a newsroom, but on Zoom. And people just went out and started reporting, mostly remotely, but some students actually traveled to different corners of the state. And in the end, we published dozens of stories for the New York Times. Most of them were in the California Today newsletter, which is read by thousands and thousands of California residents. Some of you might subscribe to that. And some of the stories ended up on the front page of the New York Times. So that was just like a great example of students, the scrappiness of students willing to go out and cover stories at a moment's notice during a national crisis. And us getting them published. It was an extremely exciting time. I'm going to try to find the link where we have all those stories. It was just like an incredible diversity of stories, like from covering homelessness and how COVID was affecting homeless people, how San Francisco Chinatown was coping with COVID. Actually, that story not only ended up in the New York Times, but ended up being on PBS NewsHour, narrated by a Berkeley journalism student and shot by a Berkeley journalism student. So I'm going to try to find the link and you can read some of those stories. While I'm looking for that, please keep asking questions.
Is the IRP more focused on US things, or has there ever been projects about other countries?
That's a very good question. We've actually done some stories from other countries, but not recently. Our focus is mostly on the US at this time, but that doesn't rule anything out. I know that pre-COVID, some of the students were doing some reporting in London, Mongolia, and far-flung places of the world. They're not really limited by geography because a great story is a great story. And there's travel grants available to students to apply if they want to go travel abroad to do reporting. As far as IRP projects, one comes to mind, Murdoch scandal. It was on Rupert Murdoch and that was basically reported out of the UK. We used to have a fellowship program. Right now it's on hold, mainly due to the pandemic, but we used to hire mid-career journalists to report a story for a year in our office, and we'd pay for their salary and reporting expenses. And a lot of those stories were actually international. One of them was based in Liberia, I remember. We had a Mexican investigative journalist, Annabelle Hernandez, work out of our office for 2 years. She was working under threat of death from the drug cartel, so she kind of sought some safe haven being at UC Berkeley. So we welcomed her into our office, and she did some amazing stories while at the IRP. Are some of you interested in international stories? And if so, what countries?
By international, I mean Canada, which isn't like super international, just because I know the country well and I know an issue that like really bothers me. So yeah, namely, it's like impossible to sue for medical negligence, like through the public healthcare system. I know people who've had to pay over $100,000 just because of an issue of mostly people who were foreigners to Canada who got special insurance, but they maxed out. In one case, I know because they put my friend on the wrong medication and her family had to pay over $150,000. And it's like impossible to sue these hospitals because of how the healthcare system is set up. So yeah, that's a topic that interests me for sure.
Interesting. Okay.
That is interesting. When in David's 260 class this semester, there were students who asked that question about international reporting, and David, encouraged them to, if they wanted to put a pitch together that was outside the country, and there was a student who said, well, I have a good idea, but I don't know how to interest an American audience in it. And David said that, that doesn't matter. We're not just aiming at the American audience. If it's a good issue, if it's a good story, then the American audience and every other audience will take notice. So he did encourage that when they're putting their pitches together.
Grace has a question in the chat. Do you have any advice for people who don't have any journalism experience? I think, Christine, you should answer this.
Thanks. I think you're at the right place. I'm happy to see that you followed your bliss to Berkeley, and that's what we're here to do, is to teach you. So my advice would be to pay attention to the news before the semester starts, to start looking at the way news is reported. And it's not even just in the major outlets, but in fact, it may be, more worthwhile to see how one story is reported by different kinds of outlets. And, to listen to some good podcasts, and watch Frontline, because I don't think there are too many documentary news shows doing what Frontline does. So if you're, interested more in video and documentary, you might want to pay more attention to Frontline if you don't already. So I would say just do your homework that way, so that you're up on your current events, and you become familiar, you start becoming aware with how a story is structured. One nice thing about Frontline too is they have something on their site where they post interviews. They post the interviews that were used in the story, or in some cases not used. So, you might see all these interviews and then say, well, don't I remember this person from the documentary? And so it's kind of interesting to hear what was in that interview, and then figure out, well, why wasn't that included, or whatever. You could sort of see the editing process. Yeah, so that would be my advice. Do you have more advice, Janice?
I guess I would just advise, trying different things and seeing what draws you. You're coming to journalism school is so that you can kind of dabble in various things, and really pay attention to what excites you and kind of move in that direction. Just sample a lot of different things, take different classes, meet different people. We're going to have, once we open up the office, we're going to have sort of like an open office hour situation where you can just come in and talk to us about anything, like you had a story idea, or you have an issue in a class, or, just don't be afraid to ask questions and seek help, because it's really a lot about relationship building, who who you get connected to can be really important in your career, and we're here to help you. I guess I'd also say just read a ton. Like this morning, I woke up really early and I was reading the Times Insider, which I like to read. It's part of the New York Times. It's way at the bottom, and where reporters write about their reporting experience. And I read a piece by David Sanger, who's a longtime reporter, about being on the White House pool and what that's like under Biden. And I was just like, this is like the really, how the sausage is made kind of story that I just find to be really interesting, like how reporters do their work. And hopefully you'll find that interesting too, because I think you can learn so much from those types of stories. It's one thing to read the published story, and see the outcome, but to peel back and look at what it took to publish that story is often a super interesting read.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I think we've come to a close. If anybody, there might be time for one quick question if anyone has it. Otherwise, Christine and I have our email addresses on our website. You can feel free to reach out. We're planning to return to the office in mid-June, and the campus seems to be opening up in mid-July for people to start working on campus. So if you come to town early, stop by our office. We're at 2481 Hearst Avenue, which is right across the street from the J School, 2 doors down from Northside Cafe, which is the coffee place right on the corner. You'll all have card key access to the building. It's not wide open to the public, so you do need to swipe your card, but within a few weeks of starting school, you should all have card key access, so you can just swipe and come into the building.
And I'll also go ahead and post your emails on the new admin website. So it'll be right under where they'll see this program is posted. So they'll have access to it too.
Great.
There.
Thanks, Blaine.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Janice. Thank you so much, Christine. And thank you for everyone attending. And let's go ahead and stop the recording.